For 3 decades, Michael and Linda Whitman were the picture of devotion. Their love had weathered the years, raising children, growing old together, side by side. To their friends, to their family, theirs was a bond built to last. But in the quiet hours of the night, Michael heard something he was never meant to hear. A hushed phone call. A voice, not his own, speaking to Linda in a way only a lover would. The name of a man half his age, spoken too softly, too intimately. A name that changed everything. Michael didn't say a word. He didn't confront her, didn't rage or plead. Instead, he did something far more chilling. He waited. He planned. And then, one day, he took Linda on a trip she would never return from. But Michael wasn't the only one watching, the only one listening. And before the dust could settle, before the truth could be neatly filed away, another shot would ring out. Another body would fall. By the end of this story, you'll be left with one question: who was the real victim? For 3 decades, Michael and Linda Whitman lived what many would call the American dream. A stable marriage. A comfortable home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. 2 grown children who had long since moved out, but still came home for the holidays. To the outside world, their life was steady, predictable, a testament to love that had endured the test of time. Michael had always been a man of quiet strength. He was the kind of husband who woke up at the same time every morning, brewed a pot of black coffee, and left for work without fail. A man who believed that love wasn't about grand gestures or poetic words, but about loyalty. Commitment. Stability. Linda, on the other hand, had always been the light in their home. She was warm, nurturing, the kind of woman who never forgot a birthday, who knew every neighbor's name, who left handwritten notes in her children's lunchboxes long after they were too old for them. She was the one who made their house a home, who kept their world from falling apart. For 30 years, they moved in harmony. Not perfect, but familiar. Comfortable. But time has a way of dulling even the brightest of flames. What had once been endless conversations over dinner became quiet meals in front of the television. The deep embraces of their youth had softened into passing touches, routine, fleeting, almost obligatory. And the laughter that once filled their home? It had become a relic of the past, buried beneath bills, schedules, and the silent weight of a life that had grown predictable. Michael never questioned it. This was marriage. This was what love became after 3 decades, less passion, more companionship. He never suspected there was something missing. Until the moment he realized someone else had already filled the empty space. Ryan Carter was young, 25, to be exact. He was everything Michael was not. Bold, impulsive, reckless in the way only a man with his whole life ahead of him could afford to be. Linda had met him by accident, or so it seemed. A casual encounter, a passing conversation, nothing out of the ordinary. But sometimes, the smallest moments have the biggest consequences. And this? This was no exception. The details of how it all began are murky. Some say it started at a coffee shop where Ryan worked, Linda stopping in for her usual morning latte, exchanging pleasantries that turned into something more. Others insist it was a charity event, a fundraiser where their paths crossed and neither of them had the will, or the desire, to walk away. Whatever the truth may be, one thing was undeniable. Ryan wasn't just a mistake. He wasn't just a passing thrill. He was a secret Linda was willing to keep. Her phone calls became longer. The way she smiled when she thought no one was watching became different, softer, more alive. She started running errands that took longer than they should have. She had excuses, explanations, all perfectly rehearsed. And for a while, they worked. Michael never asked questions. Never checked her phone, never followed her when she left the house. Until one night. A sound woke him from his sleep, a soft murmur coming from down the hall. The glow of Linda's phone illuminated her face in the darkness, her voice a quiet whisper. It wasn't what she said that made his stomach turn. It was how she said it. Tender. Loving. Familiar. And then, the name. Ryan. A single word, spoken so softly, so intimately, that it might as well have been a confession. Michael didn't move. Didn't speak. He just listened. Listened to the quiet laughter, to the words of affection that had not been meant for him in a very long time. When Linda finally hung up, she slipped back into bed beside him, unaware that everything had changed. That the man lying next to her, the man she had spent 30 years building a life with, was no longer the same. Michael didn't rage. Didn't argue. Didn't wake her and demand the truth. Instead, he lay in silence, staring at the ceiling, as something inside him shifted. And that night, without saying a single word, Michael Whitman made a decision. One that would turn their love story into something else entirely. From the moment Michael Whitman heard his wife whisper another man's name in the dark, something inside him changed. A shift so small, so imperceptible, that Linda never even noticed. She still kissed him goodbye in the mornings. Still asked about his day over dinner. Still smiled at him from across the living room as they watched television, just as they had for decades. But Michael wasn't watching the television anymore. He was watching her. Every glance at her phone, every unexplained absence, every moment of silence between them, it was all different now. He started paying attention in a way he never had before. He started noticing things he once ignored. The scent of a cologne that wasn't his own lingering on her clothes. The way she tucked her phone away just a little too quickly when he entered the room. Linda thought she was being careful. She wasn't. And Michael? He didn't ask questions. He didn't accuse her. He didn't shout or beg for an explanation. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He smiled. He played the role of the devoted husband, the same way he always had. He kissed her goodnight. He brought home flowers on random afternoons, just like he used to in their younger years. And when he suggested they take a trip, just the two of them, a romantic getaway, Linda didn't hesitate. She had no reason to. For 30 years, Michael had been steady. Predictable. Safe. So when he told her he wanted to reconnect, to spend time together away from the noise of their everyday lives, she believed him. Why wouldn't she? But Michael Whitman wasn't planning a romantic getaway. He was planning something else. And before this trip was over, Linda Whitman would never come home again. Michael Whitman didn't confront Linda. He didn't shout or accuse her of betrayal. He didn't demand to know the details of her secret. Instead, he chose silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any argument. He watched her, observed her, waited for her to slip up again, waiting for the moment when he could get everything he needed to make his next move. He was no fool. Michael understood that if Linda was truly seeing someone else, it wasn't an isolated incident. The whispers, the secret smiles, the late-night calls, they were signs of something deeper. The affair wasn't just a momentary lapse or a fluke, it was an escape. And now, Linda was no longer the woman he thought he knew. But Michael wasn't going to be a victim. Not yet. Not ever. He wanted to make her feel safe. Secure. He wanted her to believe that nothing had changed between them, that their relationship was fine, that their marriage was still as solid as it had always been. And so, he kept up the charade. He played the part of the devoted husband, the one who bought the flowers and asked about her day. The one who helped with dinner and even told her how much he missed their little trips, their weekends away. Then, he suggested it. A getaway. It wasn't the first time they'd talked about it. They'd taken vacations in the past, but this time, there was something different about Michael's insistence. He wasn't asking her to book a weekend at their usual beach resort, or a familiar hotel they'd visited before. No, this time, Michael chose something far more remote, an isolated cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. It was a place they'd never been, a place no one could find them. It was, in every sense of the word, a retreat. Linda didn't question it. She smiled at the suggestion, thrilled at the idea of a break from her busy life. She thought it was a way for them to reconnect, a way to patch up the cracks that had started to show. But Michael's intentions were far darker than she realized. As the days passed leading up to the trip, Michael began to show a side of himself that Linda hadn't seen in years. He was meticulous, almost obsessively so. He controlled the details of the trip, what they would bring, what they would eat, and when they would leave. He started making decisions without consulting her, pushing her to follow his lead. He booked the cabin weeks in advance, well before they even started discussing the trip. The location was remote, secluded, cut off from the world. A place where no one could hear them, a place where he could do whatever he wanted without anyone noticing. As the date of departure approached, Linda began to notice small changes in Michael. He became more distant, more rigid. His smiles were less frequent, his words more clipped. The usual warmth he had shown her was gone, replaced with a coolness that she couldn't quite place. Still, she believed the trip would help them. She believed that this time, things could be fixed. But Michael's plan wasn't to fix their marriage. It was to end it. The cabin was just as remote as Michael had planned, isolated, far from the nearest town, and miles away from any help. It was the perfect setting for what he had in mind. As the hours ticked by, Michael and Linda settled into their routine. They went on walks, cooked meals, and shared what appeared to be quiet, pleasant moments together. But there was something colder in Michael's demeanor. His eyes no longer looked at her with affection, but with something else, a cold detachment. That night, as the wind howled outside, the tension in the cabin grew thick. Linda had no idea how close she was to the end. She had no idea that the man she had spent 30 years with, the man she had trusted with her life, was about to do the unthinkable. The method was simple, brutal, and quick. Michael had already prepared. He had brought the rope with him, hidden in the duffel bag, along with the plastic sheeting that would cover the evidence. It was as though he had planned every detail, every movement, down to the last breath. It started as any other night. They shared a bottle of wine, talked about the past, and laughed over old memories. But as the evening wore on, Michael's conversation grew more strained, more distant. Linda, sensing something was off, began to ask him questions. Questions that he didn't want to answer. Questions that would have exposed his true feelings, his true intentions. In the quiet of the cabin, Michael saw his moment. As Linda leaned over to pour more wine into her glass, he acted. With surprising speed and precision, he wrapped the rope around her neck, tightening it until she couldn't breathe, until her struggles grew weaker, until the world fell silent. Linda fought back for only a few moments. But the years of familiarity, the trust she had in him, made it impossible for her to imagine that he was capable of such cruelty. She didn't know what was happening until it was too late. Michael held her there until she stopped moving. And then, he did what he had prepared for all along, he made sure there was no trace of what he had done. He staged the scene, arranging Linda's body in such a way that it would appear as though she had been involved in some kind of accident, maybe a fall, maybe a sudden collapse. The rope was hidden beneath her body, out of sight, leaving nothing to link him to the crime. With calm deliberation, Michael began to clean the cabin, wiping down every surface, erasing every trace of the struggle. He took Linda's phone and hid it in a drawer, making sure all signs of their time there seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary. When he finally called the authorities, it was with the voice of a grieving husband. His words were measured, practiced. Linda had gone for a walk alone, he said, and when she hadn't returned, he went looking for her. It's like she vanished into thin air, he told them. I don't know what happened. The authorities, of course, didn't know what to think. Michael had planned this moment down to the smallest detail, leaving no evidence to point to him, no reason for suspicion. And for a time, it worked. But Michael wasn't prepared for what would come next. Ryan Carter had no idea that the phone calls would stop. For over a year, he had been the secret in Linda Whitman's life, the young lover who offered the excitement and passion that her marriage to Michael had long lacked. They had shared stolen moments, fleeting conversations, and a love affair that was meant to remain hidden. It had been a thrilling escape for Linda, but for Ryan, it was everything. The morning Michael's phone call came, Ryan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Michael's voice was unnervingly calm, but it carried the weight of something ominous, something that had shifted the balance of their lives forever. "Linda's gone," Michael had said. "I don't know where she went. She just disappeared." At first, Ryan believed it was an accident. But as days went by, and the search parties were called off, and as the media frenzy turned into whispers, Ryan felt something change. The guilt he had been carrying for so long, the secret he had been hiding, suddenly felt heavier. The unease grew inside him, gnawing at his insides. He began to wonder, had Michael known? Has Michael found out about them? Had he done something to Linda? Ryan's grief turned into suspicion. The pain of losing Linda was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the dread that settled into his bones, the dread that maybe Michael had orchestrated something far darker than anyone could imagine. So, Ryan began his own investigation. He started looking for answers that no one else seemed to be asking. He reached out to friends, colleagues, even the local police, trying to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding Linda's disappearance. He found a trail of inconsistencies, things Michael had said in interviews that didn't add up, small details that no one else had noticed. And then came the breakthrough. Ryan, relentless in his pursuit of the truth, eventually tracked down a former colleague of Michael's, someone who had worked with him years ago and had some intimate knowledge of his character. It was during this conversation that Ryan learned the most chilling detail of all. Michael Whitman had planned the entire trip to the cabin months in advance, choosing a remote location far from any help. Ryan was now certain. Linda hadn't vanished. She had been murdered. The grief Ryan felt in that moment was no longer just about losing Linda. It was about the horrifying realization that the love of his life had been taken by the very man who had sworn to love her forever. The man who had been the one to destroy her. Ryan had spent days tracking Michael's every move, every public appearance, until finally, he had the moment he needed. He knew where Michael would be, alone, vulnerable. The confrontation was inevitable. But the question was, what would it be? A calm, calculated conversation? Or something more violent, born out of the rage and anguish that had been building inside Ryan since Linda's death? It was, in a sense, both. Ryan's meeting with Michael was anything but ordinary. They met in a quiet, desolate parking lot, empty except for the two men. There were no witnesses. Just the cold, harsh silence between them. Michael didn't seem surprised. He had known, in some twisted way, that Ryan would eventually come. But he didn't expect the rage. Ryan confronted him, demanding answers, demanding justice for Linda. He accused Michael of killing her, of plotting her death from the moment they went on that trip. And Michael, always so calm, so measured, didn't deny it. "I didn't want her anymore," Michael said, his voice cold, almost emotionless. "She was just a complication. She didn't fit into the life I wanted." The words hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. But that wasn't all. Michael went further. He taunted Ryan, mocked him. He made it clear that Linda had been nothing more than a toy to him, something to be discarded when it no longer served him. Ryan's anger boiled over. In that moment, the grief he had been carrying turned into blind rage. The final straw was the mocking smile Michael gave him, the smile of a man who knew he had gotten away with it. It was then that Ryan snapped. In a fit of uncontrollable anger, Ryan pulled out the weapon he had been hiding. A gun, his anger and despair focusing all at once into one final, irreversible act. Without a second thought, Ryan fired. The shot rang out, loud and final. Michael collapsed, the expression on his face frozen in shock, disbelief, and perhaps even a hint of fear. Ryan stood over him for a moment, breathing heavily, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel justice. He just felt empty, hollow, as if nothing had truly been resolved. Michael was dead. But Linda was still gone. And now, Ryan had to face the consequences of his own actions. The first responders arrived at the cabin a few hours after Michael made his frantic phone call. He had already been pacing, wringing his hands, trying his best to appear distraught, to play the role of the worried husband searching for his missing wife. He explained, over and over, how she had simply vanished after going for a walk, how he had searched the woods, called out for her, and finally made the call when he couldn't find her. At first, the authorities believed it was a tragic accident. Maybe Linda had fallen, injured herself, or wandered off into the woods in a state of confusion. But something didn't add up. For one, the cabin had been disturbingly neat. There were no signs of a struggle outside of the odd placement of Linda's body. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest a random act of violence or an accident gone wrong. Detective Rachel Sinclair, the lead investigator on the case, felt a nagging suspicion in the pit of her stomach. She had seen enough crime scenes to know when something didn't feel right. She had also seen enough victims to recognize the patterns. The small details that could tell a different story if only someone cared to look. The first red flag came when they searched the cabin and found Linda's phone carefully hidden in a drawer, tucked away out of sight. Michael hadn't mentioned it in his initial statement, which seemed odd. Someone as distressed as he claimed to be would have certainly mentioned the phone. It was a small inconsistency, but in a case like this, even the smallest of errors could be the key to unlocking the truth. As Detective Sinclair dug deeper, she found that Linda had made multiple phone calls just hours before her death, none of which had been to Michael. They were all to Ryan Carter, the same young man Michael had overheard on that fateful night. Ryan was questioned immediately. His responses were calm, collected, perhaps too calm for someone whose lover had just gone missing. But the more the police investigated, the more they realized something was wrong. Ryan had a rock-solid alibi, backed up by witnesses and time-stamped security footage showing he had been at home the entire night. However, they weren't looking for him, they were looking at Michael. The evidence against Michael grew slowly but steadily. First, there was the manner in which Linda was killed. Strangulation, a slow, deliberate act, requiring a personal connection to the victim. The staging of the body. The lack of any defensive wounds. Linda hadn't fought for her life, not in the way someone typically would if they were surprised in an attack. Michael had planned it all. Then, there was the location of the cabin. It wasn't just any random getaway. Michael had selected an isolated spot, far from civilization, a place where no one could hear Linda scream or come to her aid. No one could question what happened. It was becoming clear, this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a crime of passion either, not in the way many assumed. Michael hadn't been driven by rage or sudden jealousy. No, this was calculated. Methodical. Premeditated. The question now wasn't whether Michael had killed Linda. The question was why. Was it a crime of love? Was Michael driven by the sudden realization that his wife had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible, and did he kill her out of jealousy, out of desperation? Or was it something darker? Something more chilling? Some believed that Michael's actions weren't just driven by a single moment of betrayal, but by years of quiet resentment. The years of Linda's emotional distance, the constant realization that their marriage had faded into a hollow shell of what it once was. Was her affair just the tipping point in a long, slow unraveling of their relationship? And then, of course, there was the theory that Michael had intended to make the affair disappear forever. By taking Linda's life, he would rid himself of the pain of betrayal, restore order to his world, and move on as though nothing had ever happened. But one theory stood out among the rest. The idea that Michael had planned everything from the very beginning. The trip, the secluded cabin, the rope he had brought, everything. The idea that, for him, the affair wasn't the real reason for murder, it was simply the catalyst. The media had a field day with the case. Headlines blared across the country: devoted husband kills wife after 30 years of marriage, but was it self-defense? And, the perfect murder, a tragic case of love and betrayal. The community, which had once viewed the Whitmans as the ideal couple, was rocked to its core. No one could believe it. Michael had always been the quiet, dependable man. He was a respected member of their church, a father, a husband. How could someone so ordinary, so seemingly devoted, be capable of such a cold, calculated crime? The case would go to trial, and what came next would keep the public guessing. Was Michael Whitman a man pushed to the edge by years of betrayal and hurt? Or was he a cold-blooded murderer who took advantage of a situation to kill his wife in the most calculated way imaginable? One thing was certain: the truth was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The events that followed Ryan's deadly confrontation with Michael were swift, yet they left a lasting impression on the community, on the people who had once known the Whitmans as the perfect couple. The investigation into Michael's death was thorough. After all, Ryan had shot him point-blank in a secluded parking lot, with no witnesses, no alibi. The police had little trouble piecing together what had happened, and soon Ryan was arrested. Despite his clear involvement in Michael's murder, the trial that followed was anything but straightforward. Ryan's defense attorney argued that his actions had been motivated by years of emotional torment and betrayal, that he had been driven to a breaking point by Michael's cruelty. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted Ryan as nothing more than a man who took the law into his own hands, someone who let his grief and rage boil over into an act of cold-blooded vengeance. In the end, Ryan was convicted of manslaughter, though the jury took into account the emotional duress he had suffered. The sentencing was lenient compared to what could have been. He received a reduced sentence, and while the legal system had made its decision, many continued to debate the morality of Ryan's actions. Was Ryan a victim? Or was he just another man who let his personal pain lead him down a dangerous path? For the public, the case was a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Some felt that Ryan's revenge was justified, that he had been driven to it by Michael's unthinkable betrayal, and that no one could understand the agony of losing someone they loved under such circumstances. Others believed that Ryan had crossed a line, that no matter the circumstances, taking a life in revenge would never bring justice. In the end, was justice truly served? Michael Whitman had killed his wife, yes. But Ryan's actions, driven by grief and rage, only perpetuated the cycle of violence. In some ways, the violence had never truly ended. It had simply morphed, passed from one man to another, each driven by the same destructive force: the need for control, the need to make things right in their own twisted way. Perhaps the real tragedy here was not just the murders themselves, but the lives torn apart in the wake of them. Linda's death, Michael's death, and now Ryan's life, forever changed by a single moment of vengeance. So, what do you think? Was Ryan's revenge justified? Was his pain enough to excuse the violence he inflicted? Or was it just another tragic chapter in an endless cycle of betrayal and retribution? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one.